Over the past 4 years, many Americans forgot how it felt to have a president who preached and practiced basic decency. Joe Biden's inauguration on Wednesday had changed all that. We're hearing a normal president say normal things, and as we hear them, the perversity of Pumpkin Tits' behavior stands out more clearly by traditional standards. Biden's inaugural address was unremarkable, but when you compare it to the twisted farewell speech that Pumpkin Tits delivered on Tuesday and Wednesday, it's shocking to remember that for 4 years, Pumpkin Tits was the squatter of the United States. In his address, Biden preached modesty and compassion. Today we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate but of a cause, the cause of democracy. He asked Americans to show a little tolerance and humility to their neighbors and to stand in the other person's shoes. Pumpkin Tits, by contrast, celebrated himself and his superiority and his putative superiority. Pumpkin Tits basically says, "I came to Washington as the only true outsider to ever win the squad," he declared. He portrayed public service as a grievous burden of his wealthy family. They could have had much easier. They could have had a much easier life. He lied, and that he had won 75 million votes, and that's a record in the history of sitting squatters. He thanked himself, but not the scientists for developing the coronavirus vaccine. Another administration would have taken 3 to 4 months, maybe even up to 10 years to develop a vaccine. This is his absurd claim, and he claims that they did it in 9 months. Biden had promised to set aside politics and focus on doing the job. Pumpkin Tits focused instead on his image and on shifting blame to everyone. The bets have given us an approval rating like has never seen before. Anything good that might happen under Biden was really Pumpkin Tits doing, said the outgoing squatter. Nope, not really. And you're going to see incredible numbers start coming in if everything is sort of left alone. Remember us when you see these things happening. We won't remember you at all. As to the 400,000 Americans who have died from COVID during his tenure, Pumpkin Tits devoted his remarks not just to mourning them, but to denying responsibility. Nobody blames us for that. Yes, we do. The whole world got hit, he argued. He called it the China virus, when it's in reality called the Pumpkin Tit virus, and said we all know where it came from. Yeah, it came from you, from downplaying it. Biden asked Americans to pray in memory of the dead, like the moms, the dads, the husbands, wives, sons, daughters, friends, neighbors, and co-workers. Pumpkin Tits told the public to think instead about how much money had been accumulated. The stock market set one record after another, he gloated. Actually, really didn't. The stock market is actually substantially higher than it was at its higher point prior to the pandemic. And Biden called for unity. Basically, he says, "I will fight as hard for those who do not support me as for those who did. We must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue." Pumpkin Tits, on the other hand, badmouthed his predecessor and his successor. He said veterans had been very badly treated before we came along. Not really, but and he repeated one of his favorite campaign slams against Biden. "I hope they don't raise their taxes, but if they do, I told you so." Biden asked his listeners to think cooperatively and to strive for collective success. "We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors," he said. Pumpkin Tits, meanwhile, argued that Americans should take comfort in the pain of our countries and in the humbling of our allies. He boasted not of uniting NATO against Russia, but of extracting money from our partners. NATO countries are now paying hundreds of billions of dollars more than when I arrived. And while many Americans might be dead of COVID, the important thing that Pumpkin Tits suggested was that other nations were suffering more. America outperformed other countries economically during the pandemic. Pumpkin Tits has finally gone from the White House, and a majority of us are glad to be rid of him. But we'd rather not think about him anymore. But before we close that door, it's important to recover a sense of perspective. The daily viciousness, the callousness, and contempt we experienced for those 4 years wasn't normal. But what's normal is what we're seeing now. Don't ever take it for granted ever fucking again.